All right. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Again, my name is Shirlene Willis, and I'm with Opal Group. I'd like to officially welcome you to today's webinar with Metric Insights. I will be introducing today's session, which is titled Creating Compeller User Journeys for Your BI. Now, before we jump right into things, I wanted to just share that this session will be recorded and the PowerPoint slides will also be made available to all of you after today's live session. So you'll receive that via email. And then also to let you know that the Q&A portion of this is definitely open, and we encourage all of you to share your questions as they come up. We'll get to the questions for you after the session. And if we don't get to all of them, we'll be sure to follow up as well. Now, today, I would like to introduce and share that you'll be hearing from Marius, Metric Insights, and Mike, the VP of Sales and Marketing with Metric Insights. Now, a little bit about both of these gentlemen before I hand the mic over to them. Marius has over 20 years of experience in analytics and data warehousing. He is the CEO of Metric Insights, the leading provider of a BI portal that helps organizations organize their BI environments and ensure users are getting the actionable data they need. Now, Mike has over 15 years of product and marketing experience in the business intelligence industry. Mike helped bring analytic products to market with senior roles at Seagate Software, AIM Technology, T-Leaf, Acero, and Good Data. So with that, I'll welcome our presenters today and thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Marius. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. So when I was a teenager, I loved Agatha Christie novels. You know, if you don't know Agatha Christie, she was the, I think, most published novelist in history. I think she published something like, over 2 billion copies across like 66 different crime novels. And all of her books largely had this very similar type of arc to it from a narrative perspective. They would start off with some kind of gruesome, deadly murder. And then the hero of the book, my favorite was Hercule Poirot. He'd be brought in to be able to help solve this daunting case because nobody could figure out what was going on and how this had happened and who done it, right? And then what would take place is that Hercule would talk to the various suspects. He would ask a number of probing questions. He'd uncover these little morsels, these little clues, and then make a number of insightful observations. And then over time, kind of piece things together. And then at the exciting conclusion, he'd come out and he'd identify exactly how everything was done and who did it and solve the crime. And you as the reader, you'd look at it and say, wow, that was so obvious in retrospect. I can't believe I missed it reading through it. And, so today I want to take a similar kind of arc in honor of Agatha and take a look at the mysteries around business intelligence. But don't worry, no one will be murdered or hurt in performing of this presentation. But hopefully we'll give you some tools that you can take away so that you can be your own crime investigator and solve some of these tenacious mysteries that are in place in your very own environment. So what are some of these mysteries? Well, for example, one of the big questions people often ask is, why is it that we have so many dashboards? And there's thousands of dashboards in some of these large enterprises in the environments that we have. And yet there is a line of people calling me, emailing me, asking for information that is oftentimes in those dashboards that we've created, where we have, there's lots of filters. They can do everything they need. They can find them. Or they're asking for additional information when the dashboard that I created for them 3 months ago is not being used. Why does that happen? Or why is it that I keep on hearing from users that their dashboards don't answer their questions when I know full well that the data is there? They're just not looking at it. They're not looking in the right place. They're not filtering. They're coming to me to ask them for information that they already have at their disposal. Or why is it that we go through all of this effort in BI to take data, to bring it in, to clean it, to make sure that it's accurate, to come up with consistent definitions, to put in governance, to bring in reports and dashboards that show this information accurately. And yet I walk into meetings and I hear from business users that they just don't know if they can trust the information that's out there and they're going off of gut. Why does that happen? Well, to try to answer that, I want to start with the premise that BI teams everywhere are simply taking the wrong approach to solve these mysteries. The solution that BI professionals use is always build another report, build another dashboard, add to that pile. But in reality, that doesn't get us to the goal. That doesn't solve this problem because it's a fundamentally broken approach. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's do a thought experiment together to see what's at play here. Let's imagine for a moment that an app that all of us have on our phone in our pocket, the ride-sharing app, whether it's Uber or Lyft, doesn't matter. Let's imagine that we tasked a team of BI professionals to implement that app. How would they do it? Right? Well, typically the first thing they would do is they'd say, well, we need to understand the objectives and the goals for building this app. So what do we want to do with this app? Well, simple. Let's enable people to book a car at any time. That's pretty uncontroversial. So the next step, well, let's get the data together. So it would all be about putting together a data model, ingesting and bringing in the data, making sure it's clean, making sure it's all properly related together, that the right data model is in place to support the application. Once that is done, the next step would be to say, let's create a beautiful visualization, a chart to help the user understand, where the cars are. So, build that out. Maybe there'd be a graph or something that we'd be able to show it. And oh, wait a minute, there's a lot of data here. What do we do about that? Well, what's the usual solution that a BI professional does when there's lots of data? Well, of course, they add filters. They add lots of filters because, not only do you want to give the user lots of abilities to slice and dice the data, but what if we didn't think of a way that someone might want to slice the data and they'll come up with it tomorrow? Well, it makes sense to provide as many different ways to slice the data so that I don't have to go and rebuild this visualization or make a copy of it and change it tomorrow, but rather that this can be used in as many ways for as many different purposes as possible. So I'll create that. And then now I say, well, okay, now I've got to go take care of the actions. So let me take this visualization. And when you click on a car, let's tell the user, just click on a car to request the ride. So now I've got the action completed when a user clicks on it within the visualization. And then finally, oh, wait a minute, this is something they're going to be doing on the road. So I better deploy this dashboard in mobile. So I'm just going to create a mobile version of this dashboard. And there's your application. You've now got it on that you can use it on the road. I think it goes without saying that if you built a ride-sharing application in this way, that your users would probably laugh at you. And after trying to use it for the first time, they'd put that application right back in their pocket and they would, raise up their hand and call a cab, right? Because it's essentially not usable. And you may think, well, wait a minute, Marius, this is such an out of bounds example. Some of this feels like it's really out in the edge. Some of it maybe feels absurd. This doesn't really apply to what we're doing in BI. But I would say to you that actually you're wrong about that. In that if you were to look today, if you were to go in and say, let me go look at the dashboards that I or my team built 6 months ago for our users, and I look and see what kind of engagement am I getting on those dashboards today, you'll be shocked to find that much of the content where users are spending tons of time building out based on what feels like urgent user requests. When you look 6, 9, 12 months later, they're sitting there hardly used at all, or maybe not even used, zero usage associated with them. Right? And so these are minor tragedies that are happening every single day within all the different BI teams out there, where lots of hard work is going into things that are, in the end, not used in the way that you expect them to be used by the users. So thinking about this for a moment, if you zoom out, well, this problem isn't solved in consumer applications, right? You have a perfectly functional, in fact, very elegantly designed applications on your phone today. Ride-sharing applications are one example of them. What is it that they're doing to be able to build compelling applications that we as BI professionals do not do when we build the same solutions for our users? The answer is simple. The consumer application providers have understood for a long time that to build an effective application, they need to define personas and understand the user journeys of those personas. So the kinds of questions that they ask are, what is the customer persona that's going to use this application? What characterizes them? What motivates them? How is it that they want to use this to accomplish some goal? What device is this application going to be running, right? If you're going to be doing something on mobile, it's going to have a very different form factor than if you're doing it at your desk, or if you're expecting to get an email to trigger a particular action. Those are very different kinds of interaction models based on the device that you're working with. How is the information that I'm going to be receiving from my application, how is it going to be used? Am I using it to make strategic decisions, tactical decisions? Am I looking to is it an urgent matter, or is it something more that I'm using it to really formulate a decision that I'm making over time? How is that information impactful? And what is the action that's going to be taken? If I'm providing you the right answer in your journey and you take the action, what will be the result of that? What's the benefit that generates? And then finally, how do we know if we've defined a journey that we've got the right one? What measures, what metrics do we have in place to know that this user is using this application in the way that we intended, that they're accomplishing their goal, that they're not abandoning it halfway through, they're not using it once and forgetting about it, that it's actually having sustained, impactful value in their lives in the way that we intended it? So consumer applications do this. We need to do the same with BI applications. There's a famous quote or a famous principle that Stephen Covey, who's I think one of the gurus in effectiveness, put in one of his books, I think 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is that you should always begin with the end in mind. Right? Begin with the end in mind. If you're going to accomplish something, you need to know what you're going to accomplish. And this is the same principle here, right? The idea is that if you're going to build a BI application that's effective, you need to have a well thought out, well understood user journey and a targeted persona so that what you create will effectively engage that persona in completing the task in a way that generates value. So not easy, but actually at its core, quite simple. So how do we do that? Let's look at how would we take a persona-based approach and apply it to a BI journey, because it's a little different than what you might have on your phone when you're doing a ride sharing. So we would break this down problem into 4 different steps. The first step is to understand and classify the user persona, understand their relationship with data, how they interact with it, how they use it. Next, really map out their journey. What do they do on a day-to-day with data? How do they expect to use that information? What are the obstacles? What are the challenges that they're facing? Get really intimately familiar. Think of yourself here as the Hercule Poirot in your murder mystery. You're trying to understand all the details about your user and how they're using the information. No little detail should be left untouched, because every piece of information is incredibly valuable to understand the whole picture. And now, only then, with this full understanding of who the user is and how their journey is defined, only then define the requirements for the application and what you're trying to do. And then finally, build based on those requirements. So let's look at how this process actually looks in practice with a few examples. So first, defining the persona. Here, I propose this paradigm that we find useful. When you think about users and how they consume information, think about it in terms of this 4x4 grid. So on the vertical axis is the level of intensity with which they consume their data. So somebody who is leaning in, looking at all the details, kind of digging in all the way to understand the root cause of something, they have a high level of intensity in engaging with the data. Whereas somebody who's just looking at the surface, just wants to know high-level numbers, what's going on, take a quick action, but is not going to really dig deep, that's a low-intensity type of a persona. On the other axis, you want to look at the amount of time they spend with data. There are folks that spend their entire day immersed in information. They've got that iPad with them. They're walking around. They're looking at data all the time to make decisions, to take action. While there are others that are going to spend very little time with information. They might check an email. They might quickly glance at something. They might take action when there's an alert sent to them, but they're not going to spend their entire day in data. That's not just not what they do. Based on an understanding of where a user falls in this, based on what that persona maps to this grid, that gives you a pretty good idea of how to craft a solution towards what they need to do. So let's look at some examples so you can understand this. So to understand that user journey, right? If I've mapped the persona, now I want to understand the user journey, I'm going to be asking some key questions. I'm going to ask, how and where does the user consume the data? Is it on mobile? Is it via email? Is it at their desktop? Is it on the go? Really understanding in depth the consumption model around the data. Then I want to understand for that particular persona, which are the dashboards and reports that they use. Maybe there's something they're using today to do their job. What is that? And how are they using it today? From a perspective of usage, what are they doing with the data? So do they take it and take a specific action? If so, what are the actions? When they're looking at the data, a lot of times people come to a dashboard, come to a report, come to an analytic. They want to understand something. There's a question that they're asking. What are those questions? And do they fall into some kind of pattern? Is there an 80-20 rule here where 80% of the time this user is coming to a particular dashboard or report or analytic or a BI analyst to answer the same question or same set of questions? If so, what are those questions? And then finally, what are the questions that are hardest for them to answer? What are the challenges where it's not easy to just look at the report and find the answer because there's a little more depth in what they're trying to figure out? So understanding this together with a usage pattern is what's key to being able to then craft a solution. So let's look at some examples. And what we'll do is I'll give you a sense of the persona, and then Mike will show you kind of a hypothetical solution that would address that particular persona, their profile for using data, and the particular requirements that they have. And you'll be able to see the difference between that and the more traditional BI solutions where you've just thrown together, a simple dashboard for them. So the first persona we're going to look at is that of a CFO. Imagine Joe, the CFO. And this is an individual, as you can imagine, they're very, very busy. They are, doing many, many things. They're looking across data across their entire enterprise. They're consuming data across multiple devices. Maybe they're in the car traveling someplace, looking on their mobile device, or they're at their desk sometimes doing, dealing with data because an email has come in. They're looking across a wide variety of tools and reports. So because this person's got a lot of focus, they may be looking at all financial operational responsibilities in their business. It's not just one data set or one dashboard. Maybe some things are in Salesforce and other things are in Tableau or MicroStrategy. Other things are other SaaS tools. They've got to be able to span the gamut of all these different data sources and tools that they're working with. And then, very important, they are, as you see in the chart, while they are somebody who has a high level of intensity, where they are going to be digging in, they're going to want to immediately understand the problem and what's going on and figure out the solution. They're spending very little time because they don't have that time to dedicate. They're not an analyst who can spend all their time in the data. So they need those high-level KPIs to tell them where they need to do the deep dive. What requires action? What is the underperforming area that requires my attention today, right now, so that I can redirect what's going on with the company and make sure that a small fire does not become a 5-alarm blaze. And the challenge then, of course, is that they need to understand which part of the business should I focus on today, right? So let's take a look at how we can solve for this problem.
Yeah, thanks, Marius. So as Marius said, I'm going to sort of use, obviously, the Metric Insights product to give you some ideas around how you might address some of these things. And look at what sort of the typical example is today for these users and how we might re-engineer that. And so, what is the typical example for someone like a C-level exec in the business? Well, again, there's probably a broad set of content that they're interested in across the organization. And because it's cross-departmental, oftentimes it's content that's in different tools. So, maybe I've got some sales data in Tableau, but equally, my HR data might be over in Power BI, or my supply chain might be out in MicroStrategy. And in order to really understand the details, these are reports that I'm having to go into every day, that I'm having to slice and dice to figure out what's going on, and ultimately, as Marius said, where to pay attention. And so, we'd argue that there's probably a couple of steps here that we could take to improve this experience. And the first is really eliminating this need to have to visit multiple tools and technologies to see that content. And Metric Insights has this concept of a BI catalog, if you like, a consolidated portal that allows us to ultimately bring together the content from multiple reporting and BI technologies. So whether it's MicroStrategy or Click or Tableau or Power BI or Cognos, as an end user, I shouldn't have to worry about those tools. I shouldn't have to know how things are organized in those tools. And if I drill into a particular piece of content, so here we've pulled together the CFO reports into a single folder here. If I drill into a piece of content, I should get a consistent experience as I look at reporting. So in this case, we're taking the Tableau dashboard that shows our sales and financial figures. We're embedding that in an experience that is consistent, whether this is Tableau or Power BI or MicroStrategy, in terms of things like, if I do find things in the data, being able to share that with other users very quickly in a consistent way. If I decide this is something I want to subscribe to be able to easily add that into my daily email that I want to receive every morning. Or to do things like collaborate around this information with my team. So be able to, again, have a consistent way of adding notes and commentary and recalling that context in line with the dashboards that we have in place. So at least, start by having an experience that pulls that content together that the CFO is interested in. But ultimately, that still requires me to go and track this content every day. And really what we want to do, as Marius said, is pull out the key level metrics that this particular persona is interested in and use that as a way to really drive their focus every day. And so, how that manifests in Metric Insights is that we can connect to these different reports and again, surface for each of the areas the key metrics that are going to drive the key performance indicators. And a metric in the Metric Insights environment is going to do the heavy lifting for this user. So we're going to ingest these time series KPIs, in this case, our sales figures across the different areas of the organization, the different regions that we're working in. And we're going to have Metric Insights essentially automatically do the analysis for this user to say, okay, I don't want to have to look at these metrics every day and figure out which ones are trending up or down. We're going to automatically do that. And we're automatically going to analyze the time series for outliers that may be an indication that these are areas that I want to drill into. So we can take these time series metrics, we can take these KPIs, we can put them together, as we saw within the catalog, alongside the dashboards and reports that we already have. And then we can take that and essentially create a view for our user, our CFO, that makes it much easier to figure out what's going on. So in this case, we've created what we call a portal page, but think of it sort of a mashup of the metrics that are relevant to this user, even though they're coming from different sources and different technologies and different dashboards. We're using the alerting to say, okay, is it red, green, or on target? And if we see these areas, we're providing the ability to ultimately drill into the detailed reports if we want to look at them. Now, as Marius said, this user is typically busy and on the road a lot and walking around the office with looking into different departments, and ultimately they probably want this view on mobile as well. And as we said in sort of the Uber example, the rideshare example, what we typically do when we think about mobile BI is we move the dashboards to the mobile device. So I'm sharing my phone here. And sure, I can take those views in those dashboards and put them on the mobile device. But ultimately, if we take that page in the background and publish that, suddenly I get a much more compelling experience. I can see my high-level metrics. I can swipe through my different departments and see how those metrics are performing. And if I see something that's interesting here as I look at the values, be able to drill into that metric and see where those anomalies occurred. and ultimately get a view that is much more compelling from a mobile perspective that allows me to actually see what's going on here, rather than where we started with a lot of high-level dashboards that are going to be very difficult to figure out where I should focus and where I should pay attention.
Thank you, Mike. So let's look at the next persona. And this one is of a sales executive. Think of a pharmacy sales rep here who spends her day going from prescriber to prescriber to be able to promote the drugs that are part of a company. And this particular individual is going to consume the data on the road. They're going to have, obviously from a grid perspective, they have a low level of intensity with the data. They're just looking superficially at the information. They're not a data person per se. And they're going to not spend very much time with the data. They want to interact with people all the time. And so they're going to be looking, there's not going to be any reporting that they use on a regular basis often. It's going to be very limited, if anything. And then, however, if they do use data, or the way that they would like to use data, is to have that data inform where they're going to spend their time. There could be any number of physicians or prescribers they could meet with today. They could go to any part of their territory. Where should they go based on what's happening, based on what their competitors are doing, and based on market share changes that are happening? That's a very important, actionable step they want to take with data. Tell me which accounts to focus on is going to be the question that they are going to be asking on a regular basis of the data. And they want to know that quickly. And they don't want to be overwhelmed with lots of detailed data, right? This is a persona who's not going to be comfortable poring over an Excel spreadsheet with tons of data and trying to figure out what the trend is. They want to be given the information directly and told exactly what they need to do in order to execute on the actions that they need. So let's look at this.
Yeah, so let's switch across to our demo again. And I can speak from experience on this one, as my wife is a pharmaceutical rep, and I can tell you that she is actually fairly data driven, but is probably in the minority. And she gets dashboards like this every week from their sales ops teams. And they show her high level numbers, and she gets a big list of accounts that she's responsible for. And if she takes the time, and she has time, she might go through these and try and figure out what's been going on in her territory. Out of all these, where should I drive this week to focus my attention and see what's going on and try and upsell these accounts. And reality is, a lot of times she doesn't have the time to do these. So mapping out the territories becomes more ad hoc, and it's just, where shall I go and visit this week? And the challenge is there's a lot of data in this sort of sales environment, right? It's not just that I have a few target accounts. There's hundreds of pharmacies in the territory. I might have multiple territories. So I really have to have a plan of action. And it's tough to do that if I just get sent these dashboards every week. So if we go back to sort of an example where we might try and improve that, well, one way is using this metric concept again. As Marius said, most sales reps are not sort of data people. It's challenging to get them to look at data. So maybe we can do the heavy lifting again by looking at the sort of volumes that are getting prescribed within their territory across the different pharmacies and doctors that could be prescribing their drugs. And for these reps, typically, it's as much about new business as really understanding, the existing business, the recurring business that they have, and when that goes away. Because oftentimes, if someone stops writing, it's often because, maybe that doctor's retired and someone else has taken their place, or the pharmacy's closed or moved to a new location. And so being on top of that, you can recover business pretty quickly. And so by using these metrics to spot outliers against sort of the moving average for these prescriptions, again, we can be a bit more prescriptive around telling these reps what's going on. So in this case, what Metric Insights is doing is running a statistical analysis against the volume of prescriptions that are getting written by each of the accounts in the territory. And typically there's a fairly level sort of moving average across these accounts. The accounts are typically writing a similar amount of drugs and prescriptions, if they know about our drug and we've educated them well. But in the time when a volume drops off, then I want to know about that straight away. So we want to be able to take these metrics. We want to be able to do the analysis for the sales reps automatically. We want to be able to present that in a way that's much more consumable than just a whole list of data. So, narrow it down to a set of exceptions where, these are the 4 pharmacies that look like something unusual is going on in your territory versus the ones that are doing particularly well. Again, maybe we'll mash that up onto a page that makes it much easier for them to consume that if they come to it. So, low performing territories and accounts in my region, again, with the ones where there's been what appears to be significant volume changes as it comes to prescribing. But ultimately, still a rep is probably not going to come here. What we really want to do is, again, they're on the road, they do look at emails. So let's send this to them once a week at the beginning of their week to say, hey, here's the accounts you should go and focus on this week. Do the heavy lifting, deliver it to their inbox. They can see exactly which pharmacies they should go and visit because there's been an event that has happened there that's worth finding out what was going on.
Thank you, Mike. So our next persona is somebody who is a retail store manager. Imagine Sam, the store manager. And this individual spends quite a bit of time with data. Right? They're walking around the store all day, glancing at their iPad periodically, trying to make decisions, checking on things, checking on inventory levels, checking on sales levels. But they do so with a low level of intensity. They're not an analyst. They're not looking to dig into the data and find trends or things like that. They're just trying to figure out what's the action that I need to take today based on the information. So consumption factor is in the mobile form factor, but probably not a phone, the kind of an iPad, a bigger display. They need to pull information from multiple places. There's target information, sales information, inventory, all that's coming together in one place for them. It needs to be there at a glance so that they can take action on it. And they're making very specific micro decisions in sequence based on the data. They're figuring out, well, what should I promote? What should I put up here because I need to see if I can drive more sales, or maybe should be discounted. What kind of product placement changes do I need to make based on how well something is selling or not selling in the store? Lots and lots of tactical day-to-day decisions. And they're driven by the primary question is, what are the set of actions that I need to hit my target? Right, I'm being measured by whether I sell a product at a certain level, whether my store is generating the target margin. How am I going to do that? Do I have the information I need to take that action? And their challenge is that there's just a lot of detail. Typically lots of products, lots of SKUs. So they need to be able to do this in very little time and without having to navigate a huge amount of detailed data.
And I think that is really the key for this use case. And in some respect, the last one that we were looking at in terms of, is a dashboard, like this, say Power BI, whatever it might be, is a dashboard the best way to deliver information to this sort of user when, again, there's lots of SKUs and lots of products that they could be tracking. No, I really want to know, again, the exceptional events that are happening within the data. And so I'm going to walk you through sort of in this use case, what a different approach to generating content for this type of user might look like, given the things that Marius just spoke about. And so metric insights, how we might approach something like this is going back to the data that is interesting here. So we're able to instrument this concept of a data set within metric insights, where in this case, we're going out to different sources, we're pulling it together on a daily basis, could be whatever frequency makes sense. We're going out and snapshotting that data over time to produce sort of a rolling view of what's happening within the business. And there's probably a couple of different types of views that we've already looked at in some respects, but we'll go through creating that might be interesting to this user. At a high level, we probably want to track the metrics for them. So you'll see in this data, we've got some sales and cost information, profit, etc. So let's create some metrics for this user that summarizes that in an easy way. So, we've got daily data, we're looking at sales, let's add that metric in and be able to track it on behalf of the user for them. Let's take the cost metric and add it in and be able to track that on behalf of the user. And create those KPIs that we were looking at before, those tiles on the front screen. When I create these, it's going to run the analysis that we were looking at before to look for unusual values in these time series. As well, though, we may want to take a more sort of exception-based view to this as well. So you can see we're, selling different products in different channels in different countries. There's a lot of combinations here of filter values. Well, maybe what we're really focused on in this case, we're looking at our online business. We want to know whether there's any combinations of the products that we're selling through the different channels, whether any of those are changing significantly day over day. And so if I focus in on that area, I might want to start comparing snapshots of data to say, okay, actually what I'm interested in is show me any combinations of those filter values where sales is sales today, or sales for the day that I'm looking at is less than the previous period by, let's say, 50% in this case. Let's narrow that down to a set of exceptions that are ultimately going to drive my focus in terms of where I should focus my work and my attention on this. And I can take this and ultimately create a view like we saw within the pharmaceutical example, where maybe I want to take that and publish that as a exception report in this case that I'm going to make available to my users. So a tile that just shows those exceptions. And then I can take that and I can lay that out on a page that may be optimized for the iPad, for the mobile device, where it's going to summarize those metrics that I just created. It's going to take the exceptional values and make it obvious to see what's going on. And if appropriate, maybe, gives me access to the detailed dashboards, whether it's Tableau or Power BI, but on a single page where I don't have to worry about searching for all this information. I can consume it in one place and get easy access to it. And ultimately as well, if I am moving around, this may be something where actually I just want to receive it as well in my email once a day, subscribe to that content, see how my metrics are doing, see if any generated anomalies, see what the dashboards that I track are looking like, and ultimately, exceptions that have occurred since I last looked at the data, and make it very easy for the user to consume this type of information.
Okay, so for a final use persona, let's look at an analyst, right? So this is obviously somebody who spends all day in the data, oftentimes in the weeds, trying to figure out solutions or building new solutions, and also has a high level of intensity. They want to get to the bottom of the situation and figure out the underlying causes, no issue getting into the weeds. Typically, this person is going to consume their information, obviously, on a desktop. They are going to use a wide variety of tools and reports. They might be looking across multiple data sources to try to combine data together to find a solution to a particular problem that they've been tasked with analyzing. They're also going to need to do deep analysis while still retaining context. So if I look at one visualization and I've got my particular criteria and I see something interesting, I want to quickly swap into a different visualization with the same set of dimensions applied to understand what's going on there, right? And then ultimately, also, this person is kind of has a dual persona, if you like, because not only are they performing analysis using the dashboards that are there, but they're also creating new dashboards. They're building new reports. So one of the things they need to understand is which are the analysis that are going to be useful to the dashboard. I've got a long list of people asking for things. Which one should I work on next? What's going to create value? And that's ultimately the challenge that they're facing. It's a hard question to answer. I've got a lot of people asking for things, but what's the thing that I should work on right now? So let's see how we can help them.
So if we move across to our demo again. So, again, what is the typical flow in the first use case that Marius mentioned, right? I'm looking at a lot of different dashboards. I'm probably using different technologies for that. Oftentimes I'll be looking at a particular view and slicing and dicing that data across different filter values. I see something and I'm like, oh, actually, there's a different data set. It happens to be in a different tool where actually I want to look at the same filter values again. And, what do I have to do? Well, I have to go and filter out the content by those same filter values and pick and choose the ones that I'm interested in again. And I do that once, and then I go another technology, and I have to do the same thing again. So ultimately, we could improve this experience, right? If retaining context is something that's interesting to the user, then ultimately we can create an experience that is more compelling. And so that might look like being able to bring together dashboards again into this portal view from different tools, being able to set the context for those dashboards. So as I'm slicing and dicing now, I'm looking in Tableau in this case, and I see something that's interesting, and I want to click across to another tool. I should be able to retain those filter values, retain that context, come across and not have to spend time trying to figure out where I was, or go across to ClickSense or whatever it might be, so that again, the context is retained. And if I change what I'm looking at again, I can set the filter values once and I can go across to the other tools again. So again, thinking about it in terms of making it more efficient in this case for someone who is spending time with the data, but they want to spend their time effectively. And then, as Marius said, the sort of second piece that the analyst is working on is, as I look at this content, the question becomes, what other content can I create that's useful? And the starting point is often saying, okay, well, what are people using today? What content have I created that is useful? And sure, I can go into the different tools, my different reporting technologies, and oftentimes, some of them will have dashboards like this in Tableau where I can get a view into what people are using and which dashboards are interesting, but every tool sort of does it in a slightly different way, and some don't have usage stats. And it's actually quite difficult to really understand, whether users find a particular piece of content useful or not. And so, how can we improve this journey? Well, really what we need to do is understand how users are engaging with the content that we've created across all the different touch points that might occur in. So as we've looked at these different user journeys, we see people accessing them through email, on the mobile device, in the portal, in the underlying tools. And we need to be able to capture that usage from a content perspective and understand what's going on. So we may have views like this, where across the different reporting data sources, the different categories of content, my different users and user groups, what is the most popular content? What is doing well in terms of what we've created? Conversely, what isn't? What is decreasing in popularity over time, or what's ultimately just going unused? And using this to really target the users themselves. So maybe we should be promoting certain content that isn't going unused, that's going unused because people don't know about it. Or maybe we should be retiring content and not supporting it because it's not useful anymore. And not just looking at this from a content perspective, also, again, understanding the user journey with this content. So in a scenario where I have published a dashboard or a piece of analysis and see that it's actually got a lot of views over the last 60 days in this case, how do I know whether that was because, when I created this, I sent out an email saying, hey, there's this great new dashboard available. Everyone clicked on it, looked at it, and was like, oh, that was not useful to me, but I got 2,000 views on it, but no one ever came back in again. well, I really need to understand the sort of user interaction with this content. So I need views like this, where I can play out that time period, in this case, the last 60 days, and see, whether users came in once and never looked at it again, like these users who are drifting to the outside, or whether there are, in fact, certain users and types of people within the organization or user groups who are coming in on a regular basis and finding this useful. And if I can take this and understand how users are interacting with this content, how they're using it, I can get an indication around whether it's useful to them, whether I've crafted a journey that is actually going to be effective for that type of user.
So to summarize, right, the key to being able to solve these tenacious mysteries and create solutions that are actually compelling, that generate a high level of engagement, is to first channel that inner sleuth, right? Get a keen understanding of the persona, to be very observant, understand how are they using data, what level of intensity do they have, how deep do they go into it, and then understand their journey. Understand, ask those insightful questions that reveal the clues, that give you a sense of how will they use data, what are they trying to accomplish, and what are the big challenges that stand in their way. And only then, with those pieces of the puzzle understood, only then put the puzzle together to define the requirements. Because then those requirements are informed by this very deep and intimate understanding of what the user actually needs. And you can then craft and design and build a solution that will address those requirements in a way that will sustain user engagement and ensure that you're adding value to those users over time. So with that, I'd like to open it up for some questions.
Yeah, so as Charlene said up front, feel free to enter questions into the Q&A window. And let's take a look. We've got some coming in here. So let's take a look. Okay, so the first one here, how do we get our analysts to gravitate towards this approach versus what they've been doing already?
Yeah, that's obviously a challenge, because if you've got folks that have been working sort of, the typical paradigm of, let me see what the data set is, and I'll throw you a dashboard that visualizes it, and here it is, Mr. User. It can be challenging to make them shift to a persona-based approach. What I think we would recommend is lead with the usage information. Prove to the analyst that their time, which is the most valuable commodity, arguably, that the organization has, is not being spent in such a way that it's generating the results that everyone would like. And really then I think use that as the motivating factor to say, look, here's the things that were built. Out of those, here's the things that actually are getting a lot of usage. Here's the things that are not. Why don't we really look at the user journey and try to craft a more thoughtful approach such that the vast majority of things that are created are spot on and generate a high level of engagement, and not only initial engagement, but sustained engagement with that particular piece of content.
Yeah, I think this one is somewhat related. User journey approach seems to require a deeper understanding of the business as opposed to a simple data visual with filters. So is this journey and development approach a business activity or an IT activity?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and it is a collaborative activity, in the sense that if it's the IT group that's building the content, then they need to sort of take the leadership to bring the business folks in to understand the persona and to do things that are not, as I talked about before, they haven't been doing this all along, right? And to document things and validate their understanding. So it is an activity that often does not get performed because it falls in this crevice between the IT people know their data and know their tools and they go build things, and the business people know their requirements, and so they have kind of a single meeting and they jot down what the IT guys jot down what the requirements are and they go build something. It needs to be a much more intimate, collaborative approach where you ask those questions, you write out what the answers are, you iterate and have maybe multiple meetings to make sure that you've fed back that to your user. You need to make sure that folks that are doing this development have at least some representation of the team of people that can be observant, that can ask questions, that can understand the business, add enough detail to figure out what journey makes sense. So all those things have to be in place. So it is definitely an issue that needs to be addressed in a multidisciplinary way.
There's a question here around sort of the metric insights value proposition as it relates to this, and whether it's about sort of being able to tie together, you know, different dashboards and BI platforms, or whether it's about, oops, the question just popped away, whether it's about leading the designer through a better practice of sort of metric first design process. I kind of say it's both really. So, you know, without a doubt, there's good content out there in your organization. So the challenge a lot of the times with engagement with that content is people just don't know about it and can't find it. So having an effective way for them to come to one place to consume it is critical. But, you know, we would argue, and this is a key piece of metric insights, is that even then you need to help the user navigate it through better practices like metrics first, you know, anomalies, exception-based analysis that drive to the details ultimately. Because reality is most BI users in an organization are not data analysts. You know, it's not why we've employed them, and therefore, you know, we need to spoon feed the results somewhat and help them get to the details, because if they do, then data without doubt is useful to their role in a lot of cases. So let's probably got time for a couple more. Let's see. Are you layering on top of other BI sources, reports, other tools that identify unexpected underlying data changes that's being used in this layer? So yeah, yes, we are. So we can, yeah, from a metric insights specific perspective, yeah, we plug into your existing BI tools and sources, which obviously allow us to consolidate them all in one place, but it also allows us to delve into the data in those reports and dashboards or into the underlying data sources. And we have an engine that does analysis around exceptions and anomalies to provide that sort of alerting functionality as well. Probably got time for, maybe, how are we doing for time here? Probably got time for one more. Could I solve this with my BI tool versus additional solutions like the Metric Insights portal?
Yeah. Do you want me to answer that? Yeah. So I think there's a fundamental paradigm shift there that you saw, that you know, the BI tools tend to be focused on a, you know, any given solution, any given dashboard is all about having a, you know, a single data set, doing the analysis on that data set, visualizing that data set in a way that sort of makes sense for somebody that's trying to understand it. As you saw, oftentimes these journeys, they require, first of all, looking across different types of data, across many different data sets and potentially many different tools, but also looking for the exceptions, understanding, looking at changes, not just what the data is right now. So really it is about going beyond this individual granular component of a dashboard and understanding that that is just one step in the journey, and that you need to craft a comprehensive journey that's about more than the dashboard if you're going to be effective.
So I think that's most of the questions answered. We're coming up against time here, so thanks everyone for joining us today. And you know, you can see more at metricinsights.com, and we hope you'll join us on the next webinar.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Marius. Thank you, Mike. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And wanted to remind everyone that you'll receive a copy of the recording and the slides after today as well. So thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.